What if the oldest god was a loop? No beginning, no finish, just a mouth closing over its own origin. What if time had teeth? The first time you see it, your body knows before your mind does. A serpent clasping its tail, a circle devouring itself, a promise and a threat in one simple stroke. This is the Ouroboros, quiet and patient, scrawled on tomb walls and alchemists' scrolls, etched in rings and burned into the backside of our dreams. Tonight, we follow it through its coils, from desert crypts to storm-dark seas, from the furnace of laboratory glass to the spirals of the psyche, to ask a question that hums beneath every age. If everything ends, how do things begin again? We begin under stone, in a chamber meant to be forgotten. In the Valley of the Kings, a papyrus-like band of images curves along the gilded night of a burial chamber. Scholars call it the enigmatic book of the netherworld, a map of the sun's passage through darkness. There, a serpent encircles a god, sometimes the head and feet, sometimes the whole body, as if the sun itself wears a belt of living night. The creature is Mehen, a coiling guardian of the dawn boat, body braided around Ra as the star slips through the underworld's rivers. Protection and danger fuse together, encirclement as salvation. The circle is a lock and a shield, a boundary that keeps the chaos out. But a coil is also a promise of motion, stored like a spring. In Egypt, the serpent is not just a threat to be crushed. It is a form of time, a god's armor, a looped road. Centuries later, Greek speaks the serpent's name aloud, Ouroboros, tail devourer. It surfaces in the twined worlds of Alexandrian myth and experiment, in a city where priests from the Nile argued with philosophers by the sea. In the 3rd century, an alchemical manuscript bears the oldest clear image we can name, the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, not the famous queen, but an alchemist who took her name. She scratched a ring-shaped serpent, words bending around it like smoke, hen to pan, the all is one. In some versions, the serpent is half light, half dark, a ring of opposites, a circle that contains itself and its contrary, day-biting night, poison sealed by its own cure. Alchemists studied metals the way poets study grief. They heated and cooled them, watched them dissolve and reform, hunting the secret grammar of change. In the Ouroboros, they found a symbol of the work. To purify gold, burn it to ash and resurrect it. To heal the fractured self, let it die in the flask and be reborn. Solve et coagula, separate and unite. What better sign for a story of transformation than a creature that survives by consuming itself? Listen long enough in any tavern of myths, and you'll hear the serpent's circle echoed in a colder tongue. North, beyond the forests, the world-serpent Jormungandr coils around everything men can see, a living horizon line. He grips his tail because the sea needs a boundary, and if he lets go, the world slips its frame. It is said the day he opens his mouth will be the day the gods bleed, the day the sky splits, Ragnarok. In this version, the circle is not gentle. It is a tense muscle preventing catastrophe, a ring strained to breaking. And yet this too is a kind of eternal return, the end written into the beginning, the cycle not of peace, but of repetition and recurrence. The Norse serpent does not promise bliss. It promises continuity, an insurance policy signed in venom and salt. If we cross the desert of texts to the incense-wet rooms of Gnostics and hermetic adepts, we find the Ouroboros again, a little older and more suspicious of matter. Here it stands for the great boundary, the pleroma's rim, the ring that separates true fullness from the staged theater of the world. Some Gnostic diagrams show concentric circles of aeons and powers, with a serpent at the edge like a living frame. To pass it is to pass beyond the counterfeit, to escape the wheel of making and unmaking. For the hermeticist, the circle says, nothing essential is ever lost. It returns, transmuted. The minute hand is an arrow, the hour hand is a snake. A story, then, to make all this breath and ink solid. Picture Alexandria in evening, the sea braised red with the sun's last look. A young apprentice alchemist, call him Theon, cleans glass vessels with river sand and vinegar while his master writes with a reed pen. The furnace hisses. Between one blink and the next, a garden snake slips along the stone floor and seems to pause, body coiling into a near-perfect ring around the base of the brazier. Theon watches flame reflect in the glossy scales. He thinks of how quicksilver beads gather and swallow themselves, how the smell of calx clings to his fingers even after washing, how grief for his dead mother comes in waves so regular he could set water clocks by it. The snake tenses, loosens, glides away. That night, the master draws a serpent gripping its tail on a scrap and writes what will be copied for years to come. All is one. The circle is a laboratory in miniature, a ritual drawn with a living pen. Historians will tell us the Ouroboros traveled because ideas travel where ships do. Traders carried ivory and frankincense. Scrolls smuggled gods folded into allegory. Egypt made images. Greece gave names. Rome made roads for both. The symbol survives because it explains motion without moving, change without decay, survival that costs you yourself. Philosophers loved it because it mirrors a kind of elegant cruelty in the world. The Stoics imagined a universe that burns itself up on schedule and is reborn from its ashes, history repeating not as farce, but as function. Later, Nietzsche, staring at a shadow in the Alps, asks what you'd do if you had to relive every moment forever. The Ouroboros would not flinch at that question. It already knows the taste of its own tale. Psychology picked up the circle and held it to the light like a talisman. For Carl Jung, the Ouroboros is an image of the self, the total personality that grows by incorporating what it once rejected. He writes of a snake that fertilizes itself, a symbol of the unity of womb and tomb, devourer and nourisher. In dreams, it appears when life feels too tight or too boundless, an anxiety that you'll be trapped in a loop, or that you'll drift away into chaos if you break it. Therapists today still see its mouth in the gears of our habits, the relationship you repeat because it's familiar, the drink that quiets the fear it also feeds, the glow of the screen that devours the hours you then mourn and soothe with more scrolling. But there are gentler loops too, spirals of learning, the breath in meditation, the season that repairs what the last destroyed. The Ouroboros can be addiction, but it can also be ecology. It can be the zero-sum game, or it can be compost. Mathematicians and coders recognize the serpent as well, the loop that calls itself, the function that wraps around and returns its own output, recursion like a snake's reflex. Gödel proved that within any rich enough system, there are statements that refer to themselves and break the system's neatness. Language has its own Ouroboros too. Listen to the paradox of the liar. This sentence is false. The mind likes straight roads, but lives in circles. Even cosmology bends near the same abyss. With universes that expand and contract, bounce and breathe, no single bang but a pulse, an eternity made from eons linked tail to mouth. None of these are proof of the symbol, of course. They are echoes, resonances. But the reason echoes exist is that the shape of the room repeats. The Ouroboros is not only ancient, it's everywhere now, hiding in plain ink. It slides onto the bodies of tattooed sailors and modern programmers, a black ring with a little head that says, "I've been around and I remain." It appears in the Orin from the never-ending story, with its twin serpents bound in gleaming knotwork. A child's first brush with infinity, it marks the villains in anime, and the wrists of fictional secret orders, shows up as a throwaway prop on dusty shelves in horror films, as if to whisper, "You have seen this, and you will see it again." Designer logos rarely dare the snake, not because it is evil, but because it refuses to sell you more than you need. a symbol of self-sufficiency, is bad for repeat business. Keep your eyes open and you'll spot it anyway. In cover art, in video game menus that loop their own endings, in the ambulances of modern myth where heroes die to live and live to die again. If this kind of deep symbol archaeology draws you in, mark the circle with us. Subscribe, share, and keep the lamp lit so the next door opens. But the Ouroboros is not only glamour. Let's lean in closer. There is a horror here worth respecting. To eat your own tail is a dangerous solution. The body that sustains itself on itself runs a deficit, even in metaphor. Sometimes our loops keep us alive, and sometimes they keep us from life. The medieval moralists saw the serpent and warned of the soul that loves only itself, narcissism painted as eternity. The alchemist knew the risk too. A sealed vessel must be vented, or it explodes. An idea that only references itself hardens into dogma. Feedback becomes feed-forward, and the system screams. The genius of the Ouroboros is that it contains this warning in its sweetness. The circle is perfect, but perfection can be a trap. The trick is to turn the ring into a spiral, to let each loop rise a little above the last. Recurrence with a drift toward wisdom. Travel east, and the serpent thread glints in different weaves. In India, Vishnu reclines on the cosmic serpent Ananta, the endless one, floating on primordial waters. The snake is not always shown biting its tail there, but its body suggests the same endless endurance. Time in those texts is a wheel with ages that repeat in vast breaths. Universes waking and sleeping in a god's blink. In China, dragons chase pearls and trace circles in the air, not to kill themselves, but to balance the elements, rain and fire, in dialogue. Mesoamerican art binds serpents into circles and knots, feathered cycles of beginnings and ruins. While the exact image of tail biting is not universal, the intuition is. Cultures far apart drew the world as a loop, a safety line against the ocean of meaninglessness. Wherever humans feared that all their stories might be for nothing, they bent a snake into a ring and said, "We will survive this way." The Ouroboros also has a quieter life in laboratories of matter, where closed systems trade and transform energy while losing none of it. Entropy grows, but energy persists. The term autopoiesis, life that makes itself, sits in the same room with our serpent. Cells maintain themselves, cycling resources, building and dismantling parts to keep the whole alive. Ecosystems thrive by decomposition, forests grown out of their own dead. In this light, the serpent's bite is not a wound, but a coupling. It connects the end of one thing to the start of another, matter changing costume behind a curtain of teeth. We start to see that the circle is less prison than hinge, less doom than ligament. But it is also a key. Alchemists, Gnostics, psychologists, programmers, each used the serpent to unlock a door that language alone couldn't pick. The alchemist's Ouroboros said, "The thing that kills is what saves if treated with care." Gnostic said, "To escape the fake order, you must understand the order, pass through the ring knowingly." Jung claimed, "Meet the shadow and integrate it. Let the snake's venom become medicine." Coder's whisper, a function that calls itself, can solve intricate riddles, but it must have an exit condition or it never stops. These are not enemies, they are facets. The best symbols do this, contain contradictions without flinching, offer maps that work in multiple weather systems. We sometimes dismiss that as vagueness, but perhaps it is the geometry of reality that requires more than one angle to draw. In the end, the Ouroboros helps you ask the right questions. What loops are you in right now? Which of them sustain you and which devour you? The routine that keeps you sane, when does it become a rut that blinds you? The behavior you swear off, does renouncing it become its own addictive story? Ritual can be medicine, ritual can be a cage. The serpent waits at both doors. When grief returns in circles, what if it's not failure but a deeper way of healing, each pass gentler, each return more articulate? The serpent is not easily satisfied, but it can be trained. Small choices are like hands on its neck, guiding, not strangling. We should resist the cheap glamour of declaring the Ouroboros a secret evil. It predates our scares. It belongs to nobody and everyone. It is not the trademark of a dark order. It is a tool shaped by centuries of thought, a signpost on the oldest road, which is the search for meaning that doesn't end when the story ends. If it appears in dangerous ideologies at times, that's because ideology loves closure, loves the feeling of a finished circle. Our task is to keep the symbol honest, held within history. It came from the sand and smoke of the ancient world, from careful hands trying to name what they saw in crucibles and stars. We honor it by letting it remain complex. Look again at the earliest ring on that tomb wall. It is not perfect geometry. The snake's body is textured, slightly ragged, scales like tiny fingerprints. The head is too large because the artist wanted you to notice the bite. The circle wobbles and yet holds. This is how cycles are. Not machine loops, but living ones, shaped by weather and luck, by hands that have known both hunger and plenty. When the Norse serpent releases his tail, the world shudders, and yet out of the ruin, a green earth rises. When the alchemist finishes the work, the gold is not the point. The new seeing is. When you step out of an old loop, finally after years, you don't step into nothing. You step into another circle, one you choose, one that moves with you like a shadow that remembers daylight. I imagine the apprentice in Alexandria years later, now a teacher, drawing a serpent for a child who will inherit the furnace. He knows the fire will sometimes burn and sometimes bless. He knows the snake will sometimes be predator and sometimes be ring. He knows the words are only part of it. The rest is practice. A life spent learning to tell the difference between a loop that starves and a loop that sustains. Then he adds a tiny detail to the head, not just teeth, but an eye gazing inward as it bites. Awareness. The Ouroboros with a witness. The symbol is both caution and comfort, a mirror that asks for bravery. If you're very quiet, you can hear it whisper the oldest paradox: to endure change, to change, endure. Then it turns once more, and like time disappears where it began, into its own mouth.